Welcome to the Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast with your host, Jeremy Thake. Each week, you'll catch us speaking to expert developers about new tech, lessons learned, and opinions in this space. Okay, so in this episode, I'm with Sebastien Levert, who's in my team working on Copilot Developer Experience, and we wanted to chat about Declarative Copilot today in detail. Thanks for joining the episode, mate.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a while I've been on the podcast, so it's great to be here.
I know, I can't remember. It must have been a long, long time. We probably look in the records of kind of think what you talked about, maybe graph connectors back in the day.
No, probably MGT even then. So it's been a long time, definitely.
So how long have you been at Microsoft, and what have you worked on since you've been at Microsoft?
I've been at Microsoft for just a little bit over 4 years now. It goes really, really, really fast. I worked initially in your CPX team, so working with partners, helping them to grow their capabilities on Graph, or Microsoft Graph. And then I went on working on developer tooling for Microsoft Graph. So I was building some of the Microsoft Graph toolkit components, some of the SDKs, ended up working on Kyoto, our engine that produces all our Graph SDKs and much more. And then get a good opportunity to work on Copilot extensibility, use some of the skills that I built, some of the tools that we built, Kyoto including, and joined the Copilot DevX team. Was it in February this year?
Yeah, so you came back. You haven't been able to escape.
Exactly.
And most recently, you've been doing a bunch of work on enabling the tooling in Teams Toolkit for Declarative Copilots. Before we go too deep on that, how would you explain to someone new to Copilot for Microsoft 365 or even AI in general what a declarative Copilot is?
I think it's easy to go that way. Is a declarative Copilot is a scope down or an expert in very specific areas of Copilot. So when you think about Copilot for Microsoft 365, it has access to all the content that lives in Microsoft 365. A declarative Copilot, you can make it more precise, make it more focused to the things you want to get expertise from. So let's say you want to ask an HR question to Copilot for Microsoft 365. Well, the sources and the references could come from a multitude of areas, right? It can come from the HR, but it can also come from a document authored by someone close to you, or it can come from an outdated policy that is stored somewhere in SharePoint. Where an expert Copilot or a declarative Copilot, you can say, you know what, just care about these 3 specific sites, 2 specific documents, maybe one graph connector that brings some of the data from that helps with our HR system, and be an expert just in that. So that is also really interesting with declarative Copilots is you can add some instructions. So you can help the Copilot to reason a little bit and help with the tone, like always do something, always ask more questions, be more curious, be very, use a lot of prose, let's use a lot of words, don't use a lot of words, be very succinct, be very, go really deep in the content. So these instructions help. So you're building an expert, and you can also guide the expert in how they're going to answer questions to the users that are asking them.
Yeah, I saw a really cool one the other day where someone put the instructions say, whenever the plugin responds within the declarative Copilot, always use a table, and these are the columns I want in the table. I was like, genius. That is really clever way of making it work just for you.
Exactly.
Why do you think we called it declarative Copilots?
I think you are, as part of the declarative Copilot you're creating, you're literally declaring what are the instructions, what are the grounding, what are the areas of knowledge that you care about, what are the plugins that you want to use, and that's it. You're not doing code first Copilot. You're basically filling in a manifest or filling in a UI that will help the Copilot. There's no, in that specific Copilot you're building, there's no code. There's no code there, which is more what custom engine Copilot would do. So if you want to own the code and orchestrate your own things with code, that's a custom engine Copilot. But if you want to keep it simple, very grounded, very effective, I think that's why we're calling them Declarative Copilot in that case.
Yeah, one of the things that's happening on X, Twitter this week actually was the confusion around the difference between a declarative copilot and a custom engine copilot. What would be your key things that you call out in guiding someone on using one over the other?
I think one of the key is the areas of focus or the scope that you want to put to your Copilot. If you're really happy with what Copilot for Microsoft 365 does, but you want to restrict the scope of the data that your Copilot should respond back to you with, like basically these sites, these endpoints, these graph connectors, that's why you would literally use the Declarative Copilot. If you want to have a lot more control over it, you want to have your own orchestrator, you want to have your own LLM, you want, because maybe you're building a Copilot in a very specific industry where there's a model that really works well for questions about, I don't know, pharmaceutical. Well, maybe the model we're using in Copilot for Microsoft 365 is more of a general use LLM. So that way, go to a custom Copilot, because that way, or custom engine Copilot, that way you're going to have more control. If you want to build on the platform, take advantage of the licensing that comes with Microsoft, like Copilot for Microsoft 365, and just scope it. I think that's where the distinction would be there.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think there's definitely like a tipping point, like with any tool or choice, where you might just need that next level of control that you wouldn't be able to get by being on top of our AI platform. And the only way you can do that is tipping over into being on your own AI platform, which means custom engine Copilot. I think over time we'll get clearer in our guidance on like what that tipping point is, like how far can you push instructions versus simply it's just too hard to instructions to tame the LLM or coach the LLM to respond in a certain way, that you need to go have your own LLM in the background that, as you say, like, you know, retail, finance, pharmaceutical, those are all kind of things that there might be a better LLM out there that's going to be able to look at grounded data and make better answers for the user.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think there's also a need of in some areas you might want to also use it in a way where you want to make this Copilot something that can go outside of the Microsoft 365 bubble. You want to have the Copilot also on your website. You want to have it as part of your mobile app that you're building. Right now, Declarative Copilots are part of the Microsoft 365 experience. Being outside of it is not something that we have as a goal right now. So I think it's something that also, as a purpose, it's important to know.
Yeah, and actually, that was going to be my next question. Was we've definitely had feedback at Build. There was a little bit of confusion on like, well, where do declarative copilots live in the experience? And do you want to talk through that? Because I think some of it we demoed was obvious, but some of it wasn't naturally that obvious on what will be the behavior and where it can be used. What
is really key in what you just said is what will be the behavior. So the declarative copilots will live as a sidebar in multitude of experiences we have. So it's going to live inside the Copilot app in office.com. It's going to live in the copilot.microsoft.com experience. It's going to live in the Copilot app inside Microsoft Teams. It's going to live in the experiences that are provided by all the Office products. So Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, Word, they're all going to be there as part of the sidebar that they have in the experience. And also, they will be available as part of individual conversations inside Microsoft Teams. So you will be able, like you can today with a bot, have a conversation that is pinned as part of your conversations in Microsoft Teams, you're going to have the exact same thing available for Declarative Copilot. So you will be able to pin your HR Copilot and talk with your HR Copilot all day long as part of the Microsoft Teams platform. So those are really where they show up.
Yeah, and I think there's tremendous value in being able to like app mention a declarative copilot in a meeting or in a group chat and have it respond with information. One thing that we discussed internally, I think it's good to understand too, is like what was shown at Building Joey and John's session around reaching 250 million users with a custom engine copilot was this notion of a handoff. So I start in the Copilot app, I'm having a conversation. Maybe I'm talking about when Seb and Daryl and me and Vincent are available for our next, offsite, i.e. drink in a bar. And then we go, can we suggest some places where we can have that drink and what have you? And you can have a whole conversation with the Copilot where it's pulling from various different sources to come up with those answers. But for whatever reason, at a certain point, you might be in a custom engine Copilot for it to go do something with all that information, and you can hand off.
Yeah.
How is that different to what a declarative Copilot can do? Like, what's the difference between a handoff and the fact that declarative Copilot is in Copilot, kind of native to the stack?
I think the way I see the handoff is you start potentially with a simple question, and you can get some information out of this. The LLM comes back, responds. Then at some point, you want to do something extremely complex that a plugin would not be able to do. Or maybe you want to hand off to an actual app, right? You made to a personal tab or to something else, and that handoff is really where it all do that. The way that I've seen the most value out of the handoff is you build a plugin that can help the user in the context of Copilot for Microsoft 365. But then you're like, okay, now I want to take it to the next level. I really want to go deep. Then from the Copilot experience, then you're being handed off to the actual specialist, which is your custom engine Copilot, and you can really do the hard work right there. So it's more like a hook. You start in the Copilot for Microsoft 365 experience, but then you want to expand to a more, enriched conversation. And that's where the custom engine Copilot comes into play and really powers the rest of the conversation. What is really cool, though, is that this custom engine Copilot will get a lot of the context from that existing conversation you had with Copilot, meaning that the same way when you're online, you're talking with a bot, right? Then at some point, an agent might come in, but they will have the entire set of your entire conversation that you had with the bot. It does the same thing. So the bot has all the context it needs to provide a really enriched answer to the user, and then continue the conversation with the bot.
Yeah, and there's kind of two ways you can interact with the declarative Copilot, right? You can mention it in the main Copilot within Teams, Office.com, and Copilot.Microsoft.com, the Office apps. Or you can kind of be in the context of just that declarative Copilot. Do you want to just talk through the concept of those modes and where one might be used over the other?
Yeah, so the concept of those modes are very different. First is you use the Copilot for Microsoft 365, and you want to get a very specific answer from a declarative Copilot. You mention it, your Copilot for Microsoft 365 will kind of fall into a mode where you're going to say, you're now talking with that declarative Copilot. Going to have the question, then it's going to be an expert in that specific area you're looking for, and then you're going to be able to come back to your Copilot for Microsoft 365 experience. What is really cool with that is that your conversation, when you're going to go back to it, it's going to be a flow. So you're going to have a couple of questions about Microsoft 365, then a declarative Copilot, then another one, and you're going to be able to really have the full context. Second thing.
Yeah, so like in the case of like availability, it would just use the core grounding of your calendar information. Picking a bar, it could use a declarative Copilot to suggest bars in the locality. And then what am I going to wear? It could use the Declarative Copilot to suggest what clothes I need to wear. Like there's some very
For
extreme
sure.
examples we're using here, but and that's all in that one session, the one chat session within the Copilot itself.
Exactly. But then if you want to go just talk to the Copilot, you know exactly what you're looking for. You want to go straight to the point. You can use that Declarative Copilot sidebar that you have. You go in, you start asking your question, and then it's all grounded in the context of that Declarative Copilot. So you won't be able to ask general question about Microsoft 365. If it's not enabled in that Copilot, you're just going to focus on what that Copilot does.
You're really not buying into this like planning a bar night out with me as a scenario here, are you?
Oh, come on! You know that was our demo a couple months ago at the MVP Summit, right? That we were doing that, but yeah. Sorry for that.
So, two modes, app mentioning it. And actually what's interesting is we're about, with public preview coming around the corner. There's some builds internally right now where you can app mention a Declarative Copilot already in the main Copilot interface. But you can also app mention plugins. Why would you build, if you can app mention plugins and call out to an API, why would you build a Declarative Copilot and app mention it? What's the difference between a plugin and a Declarative Copilot?
Well, the plugin is a very specific expert in calling APIs. So it knows how to call the API. It's going to understand what you're asking. Will call the right API with the right context. We'll get back results. We'll show results. What we're really interested here when you're doing a Declarative Copilot is to also build a mashup of data that can come from a site in SharePoint, a set of connectors in Graph, and an API. And all of that, it's really powerful because it will be able to use all that information as it does its synthesis at the end. And then it's going to be able to use the context from the APIs, from SharePoint, but also from Graph connectors and the web potentially, and craft you the answer. So it's a more general expert. It knows a lot more about that. So if we come back to your example, your API will only help you find the best drink possible. But the Declarative Copilot could actually help you say, hey, you're preparing an amazing night. I suggest, based on the trends, that you try these 3 drinks, that you wear these kinds of clothes. And based on the documents I found, you should behave that way. So it will be able to kind of build up an answer. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, now you're playing along. Thank you. One thing that I love, the word you use, mashup, and I've actually used that with a few customers in the last few weeks as well. And there used to be a tool. It was Popfly with the duck as the logo. It was an internal Microsoft thing, and it brought together APIs, and there was a whole UI, and you could mash up information from APIs to give you answers. I find that the Declarative Copilot is kind of going down that same path where I could download a bunch of plugins, and I could purposely either mention the plugin, or I could enable the plugin and ask Copilot, and it would work to call the plugin. I think the Declarative Copilot puts that on rails for you because you're prescribing these are the plugins that we're going to include in the Declarative Copilot, whether it's the bar finder or the fashion finder or the policies at work on going out, having a drink, like thing that's coming from a SharePoint site somewhere. And so you're putting it on rails. And to your point, like you could just app mention it in the main Copilot and ask it, and it would have all those things at its disposal, calling off of those APIs to find the bars based on geolocation. But it could also then just be in the Declarative Copilot, and you would just be in that context, in that scope. And so I do like that notion of that. And there is some like virality we're trying to do with it where you'll be able to share those Declarative Copilots with others too. Whereas like telling someone, go get these 4 plugins and they'll be really helpful. It's really nice to be able to kind of wrap it in a bow and go, here's the Declarative Copilot that is a good mashup of these different plugins and this information source in SharePoint and this information source as a Graph connector, and share that with your colleagues internally. So I do think it's going to really open a lot of doors for people. With that said, how can you create a declarative copilot? What are the options for creating them? There's like different like levels of this, right? There's like 1P ones and 3P ones and ones you'll get from the store. But how can users get them and how can they build them?
So I think I'm going to put it in two different ways. There's I'm a user and I want to acquire a declarative copilot. How you're going to acquire that copilot? You're going to go on Teams. You're going to install an app. That app will have a new component, which is a declarative copilot, and you will be able to add it to your own Teams, your own Copilot app, where it's going to reflect all across the different properties we have where the declarative copilots are. So that's from a user, they just acquire it like anything, like any other app that they've been doing in Teams, or admins could push or automatically publish the apps to some users, all users, groups of users, whatsoever. If you want to go a little bit deeper, maybe you want to build your own declarative copilot. And in this case, you really have two paths in front of you. The one is the maker's path. As part of your Copilot for Microsoft 365 license, have access to Copilot Studio to customize and extend the Copilot for Microsoft 365 experience. And there you will be able to create a new declarative Copilot fully in Copilot Studio, where you will have a full, like what you see is what you get, like a full UX where you can name, add your logo, add your instructions, select a couple of SharePoint sites, select the connectors that are available on your tenant, publish it to your organization, call it done. It's like a very maker's experience, super easy, super slick. And we really believe that this is where a vast majority of the virality will come, because people like the simplicity to build these things is quite amazing. So it really empowers folks to build experts in different fields that they will be able to publish to their to themselves or to the entire organization. Then, if you're more into the pro code things, or you want to publish that in a very prescribed way, you want to go through a dev QA prod type of approach, you want to build that with multiple colleagues, right? You're a bunch of devs, you want to work together to build that app that will include your declarative copilot. We have an option for you, which is via the Teams Toolkit. Teams Toolkit is our pro dev tooling for building Microsoft 365 applications. By doing that, you're creating a construct of an M365 app where you can add your declarative copilot in there, and it's just a manifest. It's a file that you give a couple of instructions, name, logos, all these kind of the same things you would do in Copilot Studio, and you go through the exact same APIs to publish or to load it for yourself and make it there. So really, the makers, which is more like being viral, doing it for you or for your team or for your broader group, and as a dev, maybe you want to build the HR declarative copilot, and you want to build all your APIs and all your plugins and everything in a very prescribed way using code. Well, that's your path for you.
And for the immediate thing right now, Copilot Studio, the plugins you can include in the declarative Copilot if you create it in Copilot Studio are the plugins you create in Copilot Studio.
Yes.
So there's 5 types: Q&A, prompt, flow, Power Platform connector plugins, and conversational plugins that you can build in Copilot Studio. Those can be bundled. If you've built an API plugin in Teams Toolkit, the best way to bundle that is to use Teams Toolkit and build a declarative Copilot there, and then bundle your API plugin into that IDE.
Absolutely.
In addition to those two approaches, there is like that, we call it 2P internally, which is like our products can easily create declarative copilots. And one example Jeff Teeper showed on stage in the keynote build was, if I'm in a SharePoint library and I want to wrap a copilot around just that document library, that copilot that gets created is actually a declarative copilot where the instructions define just look at documents in this document library, and it's scoped to just that SharePoint library within that SharePoint site. And then another example of one of those is, oh my gosh, it's just escaped me.
the graph connectors. So as part of the
Oh,
search and
yeah,
intelligence
graph
center, right, you can do the exact same thing. You select your connector that you want to promote to a declarative copilot. It's going to create the declarative copilot grounded on that data. It's going to publish that the exact same way as all the other types of declarative copilot.
And then, so there is choice, pro code, low code. And I think, you're right in the virality. It's going to come through end users, makers, going and creating these things and sharing them with others.
Yep.
Just on the Copilot Studio side, because this came up a lot on Twitter this week too. Although, yes, you're going to get way more control in Teams Toolkit with code, whether it's declarative code or imperative code when you're building plugins, because you can check that in or commit it. I'm getting old now, I guess. Commit it into GitHub or wherever source control you want to do, and version manage that, release management, branch management, the whole kit caboodle. But if you've used Copilot Studio in the last few weeks, you'll notice that now when you create a new Copilot, whether it's declarative Copilot or if you create a plugin in Copilot Studio, it automatically creates a solution for you in the Copilot Studio. And a solution is a common term that's been used in Power Platform land for a while, and it bundles all of the moving parts of whatever the maker creates in Power Platform or Copilot Studio.
Yeah.
And the benefit of that solution is when you create it, you can snap off like versions, releases of it, and download that thing as a zip file. And then if you're in a different tenant, you can basically rehydrate that zip file, which rehydrates that solution into another tenant. And that's how you can move around plugins you've built in Copilot Studio and declarative copilots. In Teams Toolkit, it's a little bit easier. I did it today, actually. I signed out of Teams Toolkit with one account, signed in with another account and provisioned, and it allowed me to sideload to a bunch of tenants very, very quickly, the same declarative copilot built. So just as a heads up that, the Copilot Studio team are working hard to get closer to what we have in, VS Code in terms of release management branching by using this solution approach in Copilot Studio.
And it's great because you will want to version these things. You will want to improve your instructions. But at some point you might realize, oh, you know what? The previous version of and that's really part of all that prompt engineering and AR world where you're trying things. You're trying to improve the quality, and then maybe through time, like, you know what, the previous set of prompts or the previous set of instructions were a little bit better, or were better aligned with what we really wanted. Let's go back to that. And having that possibility in both TTK or Teams Toolkit and in Copilot Studio to have the version stamped and say, hey, I want to go back to that version specifically, will be a game changer, because then you will be able to really do that A/B testing without forgetting about what was the A before, or what
like the info path form is already in use by 1,000 people in your org, and you want to make a change, and you quickly make the change and you break the info path form, and then 1,000 people are screaming at you on email. Happened to me a long time ago. I think Copilot Studio has that notion of like, right. But it's that same notion, all those maker products, that we have that issue of like V1's out there and it's being used. How do I make those changes? And the solution capabilities are going to help there to allow you to move things when you're in different environments to push things through.
Yep.
So under the covers of Copilot Studio and Teams Toolkit, there's some fundamentals there that defines what a declarative Copilot is. Can you just walk through what those things are and how they tie to the universal app package or the team app package that people are familiar with as developers listening to the podcast?
So as part of your declarative Copilot, there's I think it's 6 different things that you can define that helps shape the declarative Copilot. The first thing will be the title of your Copilot, the declarative Copilot, the description that the user will see when they're going to want to add the declarative Copilot to their Copilot experience. Then there's going to be the instructions. The instructions is where you have all the prompting or the system prompt for the users. Then there's going to be a set of capabilities. These capabilities is where you basically add knowledge to your declarative Copilot. And knowledge can be in 3 different forms. First form is the web. Second form is OneDrive and SharePoint, which are basically items, documents, sites, pages that you want to make available as
And you
part
can
of
go that granularly. I can say, I just want
Yeah.
this file, or you can say, I want this library, or I want this site, and that's the scope of the.
Exactly. It can go as deep as a specific item,
Yep.
or as high as a specific web or site collection or site or team, if you'd say.
Yep.
And then the third way to inject knowledge is via graph connectors. So the only thing you have to do is to mark the or add the connections that you care about by their ID, and you say, this connection ID is already deployed to my tenant. I want to have it being part of my Declarative Copilot. So this helps ground the Declarative Copilot in different types of knowledge that are all wrapped in what we call capabilities. And finally, there are actions. Actions are when you want to have access to real-time data. Real-time data is provided via API plugins. So the plugins that are available in your application, so you can build Declarative Copilots in your app, but you can also build plugins. And these plugins can be made available specifically for a Declarative Copilot. And you can have a couple of them. I think it's a maximum of 5 different API plugins that can all have an amount of operations or actions that we call them. So let's say that we're reusing our bar or party night Declarative Copilot, where you would be able to have an API maybe that can talk to a cocktail database. I can talk to a store with their inventory. The third one could also be that, and that's I think that the key thing here is, it's up until now we only talked about reading, right? Summarizing stuff, listing stuff. You can also write, and you can also say, hey, make a reservation to that place. And if you call into an API that allows online reservation, you could actually do that as part of this. So that's kind of the anatomy of what a Declarative Copilot is. And then it fits inside the Microsoft Teams app or Universal App Manifest, where there is a structure as part of the manifest. It's called Copilot Extensions, where you will have your Declarative Copilot and your API plugins that will be part of it.
So just as a Teams developer, I was building a message extension before, and that was in there as an entry in the app manifest at the root level of the package. Now you can have a Copilot extensions node and call out a Declarative Copilot as one of those things that gets included when you add it from your corporate store, or if you go publish the thing as a software vendor and put it in the public store.
That's exactly it. So it's a very simple way to bundle together.
Yeah, and I'll mention API plugins. Effectively, that plugin manifest is a link to an open API document that describes the API it's going to call. Fundamentally, Copilot Studio plugins, whether they're conversational plugins, prompt plugins, or Power Platform connector plugins, all of those are, when they're published or side-loaded from Copilot Studio, they become the same manifest under the covers as well. And so when you're building a Declarative Copilot in Copilot Studio, you can take advantage of Power Platform connectors, wrap them in a plugin, and have those there. And so if you're already using Power Platform connectors to connect over to systems like Salesforce, you can include those in your Declarative Copilot and build a sales Declarative Copilot for your sales field.
Yeah.
In much the same way, actually internally, MS Digital, for us as employees, has created a IT help desk Declarative Copilot, and they've used the ServiceNow knowledge base graph connector that we have internally. We've had in Map to Enterprise Search for a while, and they've wrapped that in a Declarative Copilot that we can use now in our own instance internally. And it's pretty cool because you can ask it questions and it's just going to ground its answers only on what's in ServiceNow knowledge base. And I think they've got intentions to add plugins in there for things like hardware requests and stuff as plugins, where it will do an action off to the hardware request system, which coincidentally also is ServiceNow for us internally.
Absolutely.
So it's a really good way of mashing things together for a particular purpose for a group of people within your organization. So effectively, this is just JSON files you're building to bring all this together. Even an API plugin, if you're in Teams Toolkit, is essentially a bunch of JSON files that is defining and describing the functions that are in the Open API document.
If you're not building the API. Like
if you're not building the API
if you're
yourself,
referencing an API that you might build also at the same time, but in the end, it's just a mapping between what Copilot needs and what an open API document provides. It glues them together, and you wire this up inside the Copilot extensions node in the app manifest, and that's what it is.
And it's interesting because we've had lots of debates internally around like, how many of these APIs are they just going to reuse internally? Like they've got line of business systems with APIs already that some other system, some automated system is using, some background process is using, or even a UI is using to just render on the screen. Maybe they've built Teams apps in the past and those APIs now they're going to leverage in these declarative copilots as well. Or they could be building brand new APIs because the scenario they haven't ever had to build an API in that shape. But it's really easy to build those things in Visual Studio and produce the open API document and then wrap it in that plugin manifest and wrap it in a declarative Copilot manifest and you're away, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to know that all these plugins are using the industry standard, which is Open API, to describe the API. So whatever the tech or the tech stack that you're using to build your API, I guess that there's a way to automate generating at least out of the build that you're creating for your API, generating the Open API that represents the path, the endpoints, the operations, the parameters that you're looking into. And we really believe that you should augment these things to really add as much depth, like in your documentation, your descriptions, your summary, your operation IDs, and so on, to help any type of orchestrator or LLM that will try to call into your API to make sure that, the orchestrator understands what this API does. It's not just like list stuff. That will not be enough. So while yes, it's only JSON files and YAML files, something that is really interesting is how you enhance these files as a dev to make them more discoverable or easier for the LLM to understand what's your intent as a developer. What's this API used for? That's really where I think that there's a lot of value in developer coming in and adding these details in to make sure that the LLM does the right thing, finds the right endpoints, calls it, and does the right thing in the end.
Yeah, and we're doing a lot in the doc space to try and help you understand how the orchestrator works, how our LLM works, so that you can kind of optimize for that in your Open API documents and also in the manifest files. The other discussion that comes up is, what does that mean plugins are dead? And obviously, if you look at the rest of the industry, ChatGPT kind of moved away from plugins and went to GPTs. And obviously, there's a lot of similarity between what they call a GPT and what we call a declarative copilot. But my answer is no. I think there's still going to be a purpose for a plugin to live and be enabled within Copilot, our Copilot. But I do think the main differentiator other than what we've described so far is we didn't call out was that, a plugin can't be app mentioned in Teams in a conversation or in a meeting, whereas a declarative copilot can. So even if you are planning to build a plugin, by wrapping a declarative manifest and having the declarative copilot there, effectively you're giving it superpowers in other hubs within M365. And so do you have any other takes on that outside of kind of that?
I think like plugins as a concept definitely lives, just because now they are the key to real-time data in Declarative Copilot. I really think that plugins on their own are also useful as part of the Copilot for Microsoft 365 way of doing things. Like when you're integrated with other things, it's going to be really interesting to see what type of prompts people are doing to get a response from a plugin, then afterwards get a response from another one, and ask Copilot, say, hey, summarize these two things together. I think that's a good use case for people that are not yet using a declarative Copilot, but are kind of doing the work of a declarative Copilot in some places. So I think there's a big there. But you were saying that, for example, that ChatGPT stopped or kind of deprecated the plugins feature. They did, but at the same time, they created GPT on the other side, which is exactly the same thing, which is an open API that enables them. So I think it's important that people are thinking about APIs, designing good APIs in the AI world, that they wrap these APIs in a good plugin. It doesn't mean 10,000 operations. That's going to be too much. Like build like purpose-led plugins and build them up inside Declarative Copilots. I think this is where the experience will shine the most, where you're going to really be able to bring your talents as a dev. Like I build my APIs, I wrap them in a plugin, and these plugins I make them available inside my Declarative Copilot. I think that's really where the devs in the AI world will really shine, is when they will be able to do all of that for your organization. I think that's going to be a really, really big game changer very soon.
Yeah, it's funny, like Daryl Miller, who talk about a lot on this show, but like the API architect that I work most close with internally, he's like, yeah, APIs are cool again. We went through the whole like microservices phase 10 years ago, and APIs were cool then, and now they've become cool again with the API world and the way that orchestrators use them. So it will be interesting to see what people do. I think there's some very creative ways. And actually, one of the other topics I wanted to talk to you about was, we work with a lot of ISVs, independent software vendors, both globally well-known brands as well as, medium and small brands that target the enterprise. Currently, if you're wanting to build a declarative copilot, what options do they have if they're trying to target something that's going to live in the store and be available to multiple customers of M365 that maybe they jointly share with us?
So their options is to build a declarative copilot via Teams Toolkit. Make it as I wouldn't say, as generic as possible, in a way that bring your APIs in, bring your instructions in, and make this an expert of your domain. I'm working, for example, for right now, and you've seen it on the stage at Build. I'm working with Adobe Express. Adobe Express is building their declarative copilot to bring the generative designs. So you are in their declarative copilot, you ask a question like, I want to design a cool logo for my donut shop. And then it's going to call their API.
Or a flyer for our party, our offsite party.
I was thinking about the after hours, like maybe like a donut while afterwards. But you could, so they are designing and they're returning their data. And what is really cool is, as part of the Copilot platform, we can use adaptive cards to render really rich rendering for the users to see, and then they can select, I want this image or this image. So think about the scenarios where you're in PowerPoint, you ask for a really cool flyer, you put that in you literally bring it in PowerPoint, or you click on it and you go to Adobe Express, you made some light edits, and you bring it straight to your PowerPoint afterwards. So there's really that really rich connection between the products we build and the experience that they provide via the declarative copilots and the APIs.
And the nice thing about that is, if you're having that conversation about us planning that party, and then at the end of it, you mentioned Adobe Express and said, now build me a flyer for this, it will be able to use all that context to then build that flyer, which is really neat.
Absolutely.
Now, one thing we did discuss, which I think opens up a whole can of worms on the clean, beautiful slide that we had at Build around, like, either build on our AI platform or build on yours, is the interesting concept of really what Adobe Express is doing is they're using a declarative copilot. So technically it's running on Copilot for Microsoft 365's model and its orchestrator, and it's using the knowledge within M365 as and then it's using actions from the plugin they built. But what's behind that plugin is an AI stack.
Yeah.
Do you want to just explain a little bit about that and some of that kind of thought process if it's kind of a middle ground, right?
Yeah, so there's nothing that prevents you from having an API, and the API has some LLM superpowers that they're calling it. Maybe it's pre-generated, so maybe they're they have a template, a library of templates, and then they, based on the query, like, oh, you know what? I don't have to generate that. I already have it available. It's already done. It's in our store. Here are the 4 best results for that. Or, you know what? Your idea is pretty crazy. I'm going to go on and generate that image, and I'm going to return that back to you. So that's really the beauty of it. So they do generative AI in their API, and then as their side of the operation is done, they return the results back to Copilot, and then Copilot can use that to summarize, to format, to render the results that are being sent back. So
it's like a lighter commitment. Like that generative AI could be a smaller investment, and then they rely on our model and orchestrator as a larger AI investment.
Exactly.
In that kind of like IaaS PaaS SaaS kind of model.
It's a very focused
I'm
way
really
to do
excited
things.
to see. Yeah, I'm excited to see what people do. Like, there's kind of that hybrid model in that sense that I think plugins will have APIs behind it that are doing a lot of super smart things that are AI powered. It doesn't just have to be a CRUD API of list me my repairs and create me a repair ticket. It can be as sophisticated as here's 4 example images generated based on the prompt you gave me. So yeah, it's awesome. And I just say I really appreciate what you've been doing this with them, because it's been exciting. You've been pushing that pretty hard in private preview, and for everyone listening, people are like, well, how do I get going? Public preview is around the corner. We not exactly sure on the date yet. It's very, very close. But I'm excited for people to start playing with declarative copilots. And there's some docs you've written already at aka.ms/m365 copilot dev. We'll put in the show notes that kind of go into a bit more detail about what this looks like and the schema and how you'll do this in Teams Toolkit.
Absolutely, and I'm really looking forward to the feedback from people that are like early adopters of these things. We're already getting tons of feedback either internally or with the private preview partners we're working with. But definitely when this is going to land, that's going to be quite interesting. I've been touring in the last 3 weeks, like all the Microsoft communities here in Montreal to present and talk about it, and the feedback and the light bulbs that we get from people when they see it, because even for them, it's not possible to see it. So I think you need to see it to believe it. And today we were like in 15 minutes, A to Z, we're able to create an API, a declarative copilot, and ground it into some connector data, and the results are really, really impressive. So I'm looking forward to get feedback for the tooling, but also for the actual platform and the capabilities that this provides and the value it provides to end users.
Yeah, and actually the marketing team have done a good job with ak.ms/copilot ecosystem. And that's a site that has like 30 videos of various different ISVs, software companies that have built in our private previews, and it showcases them, some of which we showcased at Build, and others we just couldn't fit them all into our sessions that are in that site. So if you're looking for a bit of inspiration, that's a good place to start. And then there will be a bunch of code samples once we get into public preview that you'll be able to grab and deploy into your environments as you go forward as well.
Absolutely, and I'm really looking forward to see. Like, I know that there is a Copilot for M365 sample repo we have, and I'm really looking forward to see what people will PR back to that to add new samples. Totally. That's going to be really, really, really powerful to see.
Yeah, mashing up based on public APIs and what people can do will be a lot of fun. Someone needs to go build that party finder declarative copilot.
Absolutely, I have good APIs to share if you need.
All right. Well, look, thanks so much for your time, mate. I really appreciate it. I'm hoping this was useful for the listeners. We've got some really cool guests coming up in the future to talk about custom engine copilots as well. But I figured we'll get this declarative copilot one out of the way, because there's been lots of conversation around this on Twitter in the last few weeks.
Very excited to see that. Thanks for inviting today, Jeremy.
Cheers, buddy.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Microsoft 365 Dev Podcast. Check out our show notes on www.m365devpodcast.com and follow us on X at M365devpodcast. We'd really appreciate it if you could give us a review on Apple Podcasts too. That's all, folks.